Chapter 22. The Full Moon's Guard. Cyrus. Part 2. I pulled my hands away from the lake like it had burned me, falling back onto the shore. What now, kid? Tristan asked. There's something coming. I got out. The poison, it's coming. He went rigid. Where? He asked. I pointed to the other side of the lake, where somewhere upriver the oil filled the air. Tristan turned, lifting his nose to the wind. Motherfucker! He spat. I turned towards the lake and let the breeze hit me, searching for the far shore. The poison smell of decaying flesh and burning metal hit the air just as the first of the aberrations came lurching out of the forest and onto the shoreline, shimmering in the moonlight from the slicked oil. They hit the water and erupted into steam, the concentrated force of the golden light at war with the corrupting oil and tearing them all apart. But behind them more came. There were small creatures at first, followed by hulking masses of diseased flesh without recognizable form that looked ready to collapse at any moment. They were beings that looked to have been cobbled together from the bodies of a dozen others, and behind them came even more, smaller beasts, some in the shape of wolves like before, but also others like deer and boar and bears, all with broken bones, exposed organs, and black lesions oozing with corrupted blood. The first of the twisted masses of flesh finally reached the shoreline and collapsed into the water with a hissing scream, sending a thick black cloud drifting across the water and leaving behind a layer of oil on shore and surface alike. Behind it, the other beasts began to follow into the blackening water at the edge of the lake, crumbling into that gold in a swarm that seemed to have no end, and darkening the water with each passing moment. If enough of them made it here, if enough of those beasts dissolved and dropped that black ooze into the water, they would poison the entire lake and the heartbeat of the whole region. And like a grand tide, the aberrations continued their death march into the steaming water. And despite its power, despite all that was good and gold and light, I could feel the edges darkening. I was brought back to reality by Tristan's hand on my shoulder. "Take my knife, boy," he said, handing it to me. "They're coming for us." Around either edge of the lake, the creatures were lurching in droves, slowly closing in on us. They had seen us. They had sensed us. I froze in fear. "If you can fight, fight," Tristan said, no questions in his voice. "Otherwise, run, and help will find you." I looked back to the beasts closing in. "There's no way you can fight them alone," I said. "Neither of us can, especially not unarmed." He growled. "Not alone, boy," he said. Around us, wolves began to walk from the trees, taking their place next to Tristan. "And never unarmed," he said, lifting the hood of the coat up so that it covered his head, and then he dropped down onto all fours. The hair all along his coat was standing straight up, and those eyes flashed. He took a deep breath in and howled at the moon with inhuman force, a long wolf's cry that brought a thunderous wind bursting from all around him with enough strength to knock me off my feet and send the trees swaying back. Still, the howl continued, joined in by the chorus of wolves that had reached us, until it had become a great harmony of power and grace. And when I looked back, Tristan was gone, and in his place stood the gray great wolf. 10 feet tall, 15 feet long, and coat bristling with life that seemed to come from all around him. It was the same one that I'd first seen. Tristan? I asked, slowly getting back up to all fours. For a moment, his deep green eyes flicked back to me, a brief confirmation of his identity, before he braced for the streaming monstrosities. They were close now, too close for me to run, no time to consider Tristan's transformation. We would have to fight, and as they came closer, my instincts flared, ready to purge. They were wrong, and it felt right to end them. I backed up to Tristan's enormous form, holding his knife out in front of me. The wolves on either side did similar, creating an arc around us. And then with a cry to the moon, Tristan attacked, and it was all that I could do to stay alive. Swirling, circling, stabbing, tearing, ripping, I could see them as jagged, wrong marks on the world, and each fiber of me wanted to right them, at war within me with my overwhelming fear. So close to the Star Lake, I felt stronger, faster, more alive, but it was all that I could do not to curl up and pray for it to be over. Beyond me, Tristan and the squadron of wolves savaged the wave of aberrations, leaving me to pick up all that passed. I did less stabbing than I did dodging, drawing back into the water up to my knees that dissolved them as they ran, but such was their mass and their single-minded will that soon the water around me was slick with their steaming oil, and the air filled with burning, acrid smoke of corruption. Maybe minutes passed, maybe hours, maybe only a few seconds, but in time the wave of them trickled out. And with burning eyes, I searched for Tristan. Around us lay the twitching and decomposing parts of 1,000 different animals, steaming and dissolving as they still reached us, broken down by the golden light of the water, but not nearly so fast as before. Wolves lay dead around us, too, and bears and wolverines that had joined the fight, but I found no sign of Tristan. Suddenly, a great rising figure erupted from the water next to me. He was hurt and bleeding, decomposing arms grabbing at his eyes, teeth sticking out of his back, coils wrapped around his legs, but they were all falling to oil in the golden light. All around him, the golden energy knitted together his flesh, slowed the bleeding, and as he rose to his full height again, towering over me, I saw that there was still fight in him. A whole hell of a lot of fight. The steaming air made my gut lurch. It was unstable, carried with that oily steam, and I was getting dizzy. My breath started to catch at random intervals, and one of my ears started ringing. But at the center of it all, the star still shone bright and good, and I focused on that. For a moment, Tristan's deep green eyes flicked back to me, but then he stood again to focus on the woods on the far side. I followed his gaze to the streaming monstrosities, still coming, but my hands were shaking. I began to shudder. There was something else coming. Out of the silence, a call came from the other side of the lake, an asynchronous melody that seemed to come from 20 different voices all at odds with each other. Among them, one rang powerful, louder than the rest, dwarfing even Tristan's cry and making my vision double. As the calls on the other side fell quiet, I saw the trees shift, and the fallen wolves stepped out onto the shore. Head among them was a swollen beast, at least Tristan's size and half again, pitch black and carrying 5 half-formed limbs sprouting out of its flank, neck, and belly like twitching tumors. I turned away to the shore, about to vomit at the sight, when I suddenly felt the presence of Tristan standing over me. Under the clean power he seemed to breathe into the air, I was able to slow down and stop, clearing the nausea. Beyond the monster at their head, there were 4 more enormous wolves, smaller than Tristan, but still great wolves, and another 24 normal ones, all with broken limbs, extra eyes, external organs, throbbing lesions and yet somehow still standing stronger than ever, driven by that unearthly filth. Tristan growled, and I shrank away, hiding underneath him. We were horribly outnumbered, and they knew it. But they didn't move. Not at first. Suddenly Tristan snarled, and for the first time he took a step back. Towering through the trees came the enormous, hulking shadows of 4 deeply corrupted floragons, sprouting half-formed animals and parts and organs from all across them, like someone had smashed creatures out through every inch of skin. And more than their form was their power. With the same force they had emanated that beautiful life, now they stepped with a horrible power. Leaves wilted and shifted around them. The air steamed and shimmered as they walked, and the limbs on the wolves slowly twitched and grew as if extruded. The Floragons stepped into the water, and a cloud of steam burst forth. They strode further, and there was a screaming sound as the water boiled, and then as one they collapsed into the water and the night went dark. From their power came a great black, an all-consuming dark the exact same as the force that had ripped apart Sunsettin. I was paralyzed by fear, and it was only Tristan's instinct that saved us. He dove towards me, throwing his body over mine as we fell beneath the water. It was silent. Utterly silent, but I felt the waves ripple across us, squeezing us, threatening to engulf and corrupt, a battle for life itself. I felt my heart stop and start again, and I felt Tristan fade slowly away. And then we pulled back above the water. Half of the fur on Tristan's back had been torn off and rippled with lesions, with sprouting growths. He breathed heavily now, showing the signs of the war and the poison in the air. I stepped back away. That darkness pulsed on him. No. Tristan. I stepped away. I needed to run. I needed to get out. Tristan looked at me, eyes spinning, eyes black. But then with a proud roar, he pulsed with life, and the growths turned to oil on his back, searing but unchanging. With a howl of defiance, he turned, facing the wolves. Behind us lay devastation. A few of the wolves on our side had survived, but others lay severed and dying, steaming and in pieces from the explosion. Some limbs beginning to twitch of their own accord. Before long they might awaken again, corrupted, and though Tristan had fought it off, I didn't think they could. Beyond them on all sides the trees lay burning and melting, some collapsed under their own weight, others now bubbling in the poison fog and growing, splitting. Across the lake there was a splash. The lead wolf stepped into the black water, flanked by his followers, eyes locked on Tristan, and oozing teeth twisted into a crooked smile. The oil from the decaying corpses had nearly reached the center of the lake. Behind them, even more aberrations came from the darkness, flowing past him to pave a path to the lake's very center. For the first time, even the stars' pulse faltered, a shaky stuttering in that natural beat. In the water in front of me, I could see dying minnows floating to the surface, and scores of flies and bugs crashing to the ground, twitching. They were only the start. The strength started to go out of me. We had to run. We couldn't stop them. There was no chance. But as I stepped to run away, Tristan remained, eyes proud, standing true, straightening to face the wolves on the far shore.
No. Tristan, we have to go.
He looked at me with a ragged smile, one of utter defiance and pride, and he stepped out into the water, howling to the moon. And all around us in the woods, the call echoed out from 100 different directions. The beasts held back in their black advance and now stood, with snapping teeth and grasping limbs, to face the forest. From behind the clouds of steam and blood, from behind the darkness, the full moon broke through, and we were bathed in light. From the woods, the wind began to blow fresh and clean, and from the forest behind us and all along the shore east to west, the protectors of the forest strode out onto the beach. 50 great wolves in all, each flanked by smaller packs, each silently emanating raw, natural power. The swarm across from us stopped, eyes on the force assembling against them. The main behemoth's smiling snarl went quiet, and his shoulders raised as he prepared for battle. Even with 50, there were none against our number that could match him in raw size and power, and he seemed ready to drag down as many with him as he could. As quickly as it had risen, the wind died, and there was stillness on the lake. The cries of the dying animals faded away into nothing, quieted by the gentle breath and the footsteps in the woods. Across the water, the twisted beasts all along the shore moved back, taking small steps away. Only their leader stood true, crouching like a caged animal, still ready to fight, and still ready to die. Everything was silent except for the sound of a gentle, powerful breath, one that echoed the rhythm of the starlight as naturally as the earth gave way to life. And then out into that moonlight stepped a silhouette against the silver sky. A phantom, something that felt a half step removed from our world, straddling the line of myth and reality. The guiding light for all wolves for thousands of miles who ran under the night sky. Aerithim, their star-tailed comet. For a moment he stood facing the twisted behemoth across the way, like two opposite sides of a coin, reflections in a mirror. They could have been brothers, matched almost exactly for size, color, and build, and maybe long ago they had been. I could imagine them fighting together. I could imagine them growing together, but I could not imagine them leading together. There could only be one Aerithim. I shook my head. Imagination had no place here, not on the lake tonight. Whatever had been once would never be again. And now, flanked by the ice-white wolf on his left and Tristan's silver form on his right, Aerithim stepped onto the surface of the lake, walking on the water as easily as the ground beneath us. Around the shore, the other wolves stepped onto the water. The behemoth in the lake gritted his teeth, lifting his exposed ribs and lungs as he prepared for his battle cry, a last-ditch effort to shift the balance of power back to his side. On our side of the lake, Aerithim stepped forward and breathed in. The aberration may have called out then, but if he had, there would have been no way for anyone to tell. Aerithim called with a force elemental, a sound with the power to slow the seasons, one that would be heard 100 miles away, layered underneath with the matching calls of 50 great wolves beside him. Tonight, all across the western shores of Edara and far inland, children would run to their parents, creatures would freeze in fear, and even the predators would hide from the sounds of the wolves. And as Aerithim's call fell silent, the full moon's guard charged across the black water. A few of the aberrations braced the line, lurching closer together to stand with their leader, but most of them turned and ran, broken limbs and malformed appendages already sloughing off of them. Their choices, in the end, though, were irrelevant. Under the force of the wolves, the black beasts were washed away like a poorly built sandcastle on the beach. Their charge carried the wolves up the shore into the forest, where, throughout the trees, I could hear the sounds of death as the corrupted animals were killed off in droves and hunted to the last. The only remnant was the monstrosity, which had broken the line with a mighty leap, paying no attention to Aerithim and surging towards the center of the lake, sinking into the water and starting to swim. He was making a last desperate attempt at the power pulsing under the water. But then a shadow fell across the sky, down like a surging meteor towards the back of the misshapen beast. There was a great eruption of glowing green and black, and then Aerithim landed, hitting the surface of the water like the star that had fallen here. The lake ran out in a sound like a clear bell, water flashing a deep green, and where Aerithim had landed there was no corruption for 100 yards. He stood on the lake unharmed, looking down at the body of the other, fallen wolf. In death, the extra limbs, the lesions and sores were all falling away, leaving behind a broken, battered body that was nearly unrecognizable, but was a wolf nonetheless. I'm not sure what thoughts they exchanged before the broken black wolf sank into the unfathomable depths of the lake, nor do I feel like I had any right to. What was between them, and none of us there that day would ever ask. For a while afterward, Aerithim stood still at the center of the lake, eyes down at the impossible depths beneath him, until one by one the great wolves returned to the shores. The light of the lake slowly began to overcome that dissipating darkness, consuming any trace of the corrupted wolves and the army that had led them here. As the last remnants of that corrupted army turned to mist and dissolved, Aerithim turned to us, standing tall at the center of the lake, and howled to the sky. This was a different howl, though, not a battle cry, but instead one of great melancholy, laced with sadness and mourning. And every wolf for 100 miles raised their calls in response. A while later, I got the courage to ask Tristan, why? Why when they had just won? He had long since returned to his human form and simply placed his hand on my shoulder. Because it doesn't matter what they were fighting for, what drove them against us, or why they died. Our brothers and sisters are gone, and for that we will always sing.